Welcome back to Open Line, talking property taxes and talking with Tori Venable, State Director for Americans for Prosperity, and Jason Freeman, Political Director for SEIU. Jason Freeman with SEIU said we have one of the lowest property tax rates of major cities in the state of Tennessee, talking about Knoxville, Chattanooga. Even with this large 34-37% property tax increase. Tori, I said you could comment on that. So he's saying even with this big increase, we still have a low rate.
Well, tell that to the property owner that can't afford it. Tell that to the renter that can't, is going to see that passed on even though they rent. People can't afford this right now. Everyone has had to tighten their belt. Government should do the same thing. And if we really want to get serious about it, we need to start addressing some of these unfunded pension liabilities, because they make promises to Metro workers and say that they're going to fund their health care and fund their retirements, and they're not funding it at all. So we're digging a hole deeper. And then you look at the Metro Council, who have this Cadillac plan of free health care for life for them and their families, which, by the way, is not offered anywhere else. Not a single other city, not anywhere else in the state has that sweet of a deal that politicians in Nashville get to cash in and have free health care for themselves and their families for the rest of their lives. So I'd like to hear who's willing to step up and fix that.
All right, let's go back to the phones here. Let's go to a Metro Council member. Let's go to Robert Nash with District 27. Is that right? Is this Councilman Nash?
That's correct.
Hi. So what do you think of this conversation? Thanks for being here.
Oh, Ms. Venable is so mistaken on so many issues. It's hard to get my head around it. Just speaking of the insurance program, it's not free to any councilman. They have to pay the same rate as Metro employees, which is at least 25%. Now, I agree with you. There's certainly discussion around whether or not Metro employee or Metro councilmen should get this kind of lifetime benefit if they're willing to pay their share of it. And that's certainly going to be for discussion this year, next year, and the year after. The Metro Pension Fund, Ms. Venable, is very well funded, and we're not behind the eight ball on that one. And you can rest assured that we're going to be okay on the pension side.
Okay, and what
I've listened to this discussion, and the problem almost started back in 2008. I was in the planning division of the police department, and when we had the Great Recession, and I said, oh boy, we're going to have layoffs. And Mayor Carl Dean pulled a rabbit out of his hat, and they refinanced a bunch of debt. And that all came due with the balloon note in 10 years later, and caught a bunch of, people took their eye off the ball. And so we had this extra debt. But in the meantime, Metro employees had their pay frozen for 10 years. For the first time in Metro history, we froze pay steps, so the actual pay plans weren't funded either. And Metro employees have bitten the bullet now for a long time, and we were just kind of getting to the point where we could make some progress, and then COVID hit. Now, in 2017, Mayor Berry was trying to get tax increase for her transit plan, the big transit plan, so we couldn't have a tax increase and make an adjustment when the reappraisal was done, so there went some funding. And then we ended up having Mayor Briley have to run 2 years in a row. And of course, you can't do anything responsible in government when you're running for office. So we went 2 years without modest tax increases that would have provided the kind of funding that would have let us absorb some of the losses from COVID in a much more easier manner. And we wouldn't have had to have the big tax increase that we needed this year. I have and frankly, if it hadn't been for COVID, we'd have skirted through this year, and there'd been a smaller tax increase proposed this year, without a doubt, to help get our city back on a sound financial basis.
Right.
2% is highly, highly, highly irresponsible, and frankly, this group ought to be ashamed of even proposing such a terrible amendment to our charter. And I truly believe that once people understand how poor this amendment would be, that it will be beaten soundly.
And Councilman, do you have an answer to the disagreement that we have here at the top of the show? If this were to pass, would it repeal the property tax increase that is already going into effect? I mean, they are saying that...
I am not a lawyer, but from what I've heard already, I'm not sure that the charter amendment would be legal, number one. I think state law puts the responsibility for tax increases on the legislative body of the county, number one. But certainly this would decimate metro government. But I understand, look, there's no worse time to have done this than in this COVID crisis. At the same time, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the COVID crisis.
Right.
Not every business has shut down. You go to the grocery store, you go to Lowe's, you go to all kinds of businesses because they're essential. The city government is essential. We haven't added people. We're not adding to the process. And let me speak to the incentives for business.
Council, we're going to have to go. I've got to go. I've got to take a break.
I'm sorry.
But
Okay.
Councilman, thank you for your perspective. We'll come back. We'll hear more from our guests. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.